So you got married and maybe you were working, but now you're not working and you're about to not be married. So do you get spousal support? Let's talk about it. Spousal support, also referred to as alimony, but that's like from years ago, is one of the most controversial, heavily debated and argued issues in a divorce. It doesn't always matter, but sometimes it does. So let's talk about the common myths and what you can expect if spousal support is an issue in your divorce.
Welcome to Gavels Down, Voices Up, where we flip the script on conventional legal discussions. I'm Rachel King, here to guide you through the murky waters of family law, estate conflicts, inheritance disputes, all of the dramas. We're not just talking about law, we're talking about how it affects your life, your rights, your future, and your money. From the courtroom to your living room, we bring you insights that matter. Dive into each episode ready to challenge, learn, and grow. Ready to change the dialogue? Let's begin. Gavels down, voices up.
Let's start at the bottom or the top. Let's get into alimony. Who gets it? What matters? And what are some of the most misunderstood issues in spousal support? And really, those are my most favorite. So what is spousal support? Spousal support is money that is paid. Typically, higher wage earner pays lower wage earner at the time of divorce or separation. And it goes on for a period of time. At least in California, how long it goes on for really depends on the length of the marriage, though every state has different rules. And actually, I'm licensed in California and Texas, and I have to say, of all of the states and the different laws, California and Texas have the most different spousal support laws. And as the higher wage earner in my marriage, I have to say, if I was going to get divorced and spousal support was an issue, I'd want to head on over to Texas. But you make the decision in your divorce. So let's talk spousal support. In California, a marriage is considered long-term, typical if it lasts more than 10 years. If it's under 10 years, it's typically considered a short-term marriage. And in a short-term marriage, you're going to get alimony or spousal support for roughly half the length of the marriage. In a long-term marriage, anything over 10 years, you're going to be getting spousal support potentially indefinitely. And that's the scary part. There are, of course, factors that spousal support will necessarily end at, or it can be modified. So that's the first place, is how long are you married and who gets the spousal support? During a marriage, we all know that there's marital decisions. Maybe you started married, but then you guys had children. You were the stay-at-home spouse that decided to take care of kids, support other spouse in their career, and now you're sitting here 15 years later like, if I'd only done my career, I would be not having these financial issues in divorce. And I'm a big advocate of financial independence. In fact, I speak about financial independence all the time. If I was going to run for president, that would be my platform. So we're not talking about being financially independent, because typically if both spouses are financially independent, then spousal support is not an issue. You got it? All right. Higher wage earner pays lower wage earner, and we look at mostly the last few years of income and actual income. And spousal support can be paid even when there's a huge division of assets. So asset division is different than spousal support. Maybe you're a very wealthy, and I'm going to maybe give myself away, but maybe you're a very wealthy couple and you have a few $1,000,000 and you divide it up so you're each walking away with $1.5 million. Well, that doesn't mean that you won't be receiving spousal support or paying spousal support. If one of you stayed home, higher wage earner is going to pay lower wage earner, even though lower wage earner has 1.5 million. So you see now why spousal support can get to be controversial. I want to take a break now and say that you can always agree on spousal support. So even though the law says one thing, that doesn't actually mean it has to occur in your marriage. For example, maybe this is wishful thinking, but if I were to get divorced, I would hope that neither one of us had to pay spousal support, because we're both income producing and we're both very able to award an income. If that were to happen, I don't know if that's what if that would align with the law, but in your case, you can always agree on whatever you want, even if it's contrary to what the law says, good or bad. All right, so before we get into the most misunderstood spousal support issues, let me say this. In a short-term marriage, again, it's half the length of a marriage. In long-term marriage, it goes on indefinitely, but I did want to at least pop in and give you the times that typically in California spousal support will end, and that's if the supported party, that's the person receiving support, gets remarried, then there is going to be a new marital standard of living. Ex-spouse doesn't have to continue to pay spousal support. If either one of you dies, then that is potentially an end of spousal support, though sometimes the estate will have to pay out on a spousal support obligation, especially arrears or any amount that was owed. If a higher wage earner reduces their income, then the court can modify. If support's head party or the person receiving support ends up making more money, then the court can modify. If one of you retires or both of you retire, the court can modify. And really, a court has the discretion to modify or reduce support at any time that they think that it's reasonable to do so. This could be, it's just that you were married for 15 years, but you've been divorced for 30 years and you're still on the hook and working, and the court might be like, well, gosh, that's enough time to have the support head spouse either create a new standard of living or figure out how to become self-supporting. So there are different factors. Bottom line is you never are guaranteed to get spousal support. And so as you're going through your divorce process, considering that and figuring out how to become self-supporting as quickly as possible, or reach an agreement that's not going to land you in court every 2 years to defend or try and reduce spousal support, can be helpful. So now we're going to start with a case. As I tell the stories about the most misunderstood parts of spousal support, we're going to start with a case. I was once in court and I saw a wife who, for the duration of the marriage, it seemed like based on the court proceedings, this was a long-term marriage. Wife had been a stay-at-home wife. There was no children of the marriage, so wife was staying home, but that was the marital standard. Husband made a really great income. At the time, I think husband was bringing in about $300,000 a year, and this was almost a decade ago. So long time ago, that was a lot more money. It went a lot farther. So they're getting divorced and wife wants spousal support. No surprise. She's been stay at home for the entire length of the marriage, which is in excess of 10 years. Husband doesn't want to pay spousal support, right? Very typical. Marriage is over. I shouldn't have to support you any longer. So he's taking that fairly traditional stance in this proceeding. Nonetheless, the court makes it clear to both husband and wife that husband, you're going to be paying spousal support, and wife, you are still going to have to get a job at some point. Spousal support isn't going to be quite as high as you probably would like it to be. All right. Husband maybe pulled some strings. I don't know. I wasn't privy to the inside details, but gets laid off about 3 weeks before the court is to make a temporary spousal support order. All of the paperwork that was presented to the court shows that it was a legitimate layoff. Husband really did nothing to be part of this layoff, and that he was now only going to be collecting unemployment. At that point, he was collecting $1,600 a month in unemployment, and that's the paperwork that he brought into court on this particular day. So wife comes in apparently thinking she's going to get quite a hefty spousal support award because husband was making $300,000, has the ability to make $300,000, and it's a little fishy that he all of a sudden gets laid off from this career he has right before the court is going to make a spousal support order. Nonetheless, this is what the judge said. Wife, we have $1,600 a month in the income bucket right now as we sit here today because husband was laid off. And all of the paperwork shows that he was legitimately laid off and it had nothing to do with him trying to get himself forced laid off. So while he used to earn $300,000, today he doesn't have that much money. We are working with $1,600 a month in unemployment income. The court said, but husband, even though you can't live off of $1,600 a month, you still have to give up some of it for spousal support. That day, the temporary order was that husband would pay wife $600 a month of his unemployment and keep $1,000 a month of his unemployment. Well, can you imagine? Both parties were totally pissed off. Wife, how can I possibly live off of $600? He did this all intentionally. Husband, oh my gosh, I can't even afford live off of $1,600. What am I supposed to be doing giving her $600? I'm not sure how the court ended up playing out on a long-term basis. There could have been financial analysis. There could have been imputation of income. Wife could have been forced to get a job. Who knows how it played out in the long run? But the bottom line in that story is that the court was using exactly the available income at the time. And that's why spousal support should never be expected. If you can become financially independent and self-supporting, that is going to be better for you long term. Also, who wants to be financially reliant on somebody that's not that into them anymore? I don't know. I personally wouldn't. So now let's get into the most misunderstood parts of spousal support. First, you don't have to work. Absolutely false when it comes to spousal support. In fact, every court I've ever been with has said that both spouses should be working, absent some real huge issue as to why you aren't working. Maybe you've reached retirement age and that would be a legitimate exception. Disability, well, you should be approved for disability. I can't tell you how many people I've seen walk into court and say that they can't work because they are disabled, but they don't qualify for disability or they're not collecting it. Probably the court's going to be like, you should go get a job. Then the stay-at-home spouse for the entire length of the marriage, or only worked part-time. That's great. What a fantastic marital decision. Doesn't carry through on divorce. You probably are going to have to get a job. Haven't worked in your career for the entire length of the marriage because you kind of gave it aside. Yes, you have a PhD, but you've never worked in it. Okay, got it. You can probably still go get a minimum wage job. There's really not any circumstance that I've ever seen where a person doesn't have to get a job and get on their way to becoming self-supporting. This is true even if you have children. There's childcare, there's spousal support, there's sharing the cost of childcare. You're going to have to get a job. You're going to have some kind of income. And if you can't or don't, the court can impute you. Let's take our couple that we were talking about a minute ago. Husband very likely could have ultimately been imputed at the $300,000 range because on a temporary basis, maybe it looked legit. But even if it was a legit layoff, if there's a whole bunch of other jobs that husband can get making the same amount or more, or just more than $1,600, the court's going to say, yeah, you should go get them, and can force husband to either work that much or pay based on whether he was earning it. And the same is true of wife in that case. If wife says, oh, but I just can't work, I never have in my entire marriage, and I don't intend to now, the court can say, that's fine. And you have no skills. So we're not going to expect you to make a huge amount of money, but there's really no reason that you can't work full-time minimum wage. Court can't force wife to go out and get a job, but sure can impute that much income when calculating spousal support. So it is just simply not true that you don't have to work in a divorce when it comes to spousal support. The court can absolutely consider you a working person.
Let's take a quick break. If you're navigating the twists and turns of divorce, you might be wondering, getting divorced, now what? That's actually the title of my upcoming book, designed to guide you through the challenging and emotional process of divorce. It's packed with real-life stories, expert tips, and motivational insights to empower you every step of the way. While it's not available just yet, you can join the waitlist to make sure you don't miss out. Head over to rachelkingattorney.com to sign up to be the first to get a copy and enter to win a free signed copy as soon as it releases. Arm yourself with the knowledge to move forward confidently through this challenging time. Now let's get back to the show.
Well, if I quit working, then I don't have to pay support, or if I'm receiving support, it goes up. False. Totally false. You cannot voluntarily quit your job just for the purposes of spousal support. This means that in our scenario, if husband actually had quit his $300,000 per year job, the court would have imputed him at the entire amount for the purposes of calculating spousal support. The same thing could be true for wife. Let's say wife also had an income and was making $100,000 and said, well, I didn't even want this divorce in the first place. So if I'm going to get divorced, I'm going to quit my job and I'm going to make husband over here pay me spousal support as though I was unemployed. Nope, totally false. Wife in that case would be imputed at the previous income. You can't quit your job for the purposes of benefiting when it comes to your spousal support. But here's a kicker. And this happens a lot. Your spouse stopped working a few years ago and you didn't like it, but you kind of accepted it. You guys stayed married and now you're getting divorced and you're like, yeah, but they worked 3 years ago. They can work now. Again, the court is going to be looking at the period of time pretty close to when the divorce happened in most cases and is going to make a spousal support order based on that. So yes, history matters, but still we're dealing with the financials close to or at the time that the court is being asked to make a spousal support award. Well, I'm cohabitating, but I'm not getting remarried, so that won't affect my spousal support at all. Again, absolutely not true. Spousal support in a long-term marriage does go on until the other or the supported spouse gets remarried. That's one of the times that it automatically terminates. But can you imagine, I'm sure you can, how many people just don't get remarried because they are trying to maintain their spousal support award? They've been dating or shacking up, hooking up, living with, all of the things this other person for a really long time, and absent spousal support, they would have gotten remarried? Yes. Cohabitation. If you can prove that somebody is cohabitating and is in a marital type relationship, essentially establishing a brand new standard of living, yeah, the court has the discretion to cancel out, reduce, or set spousal support at zero, even in a long-term marriage. So if you think you're going to get through a loophole, not get married, just live together and live as though you're married but not official, that is not going to work in all cases. And you might affect your spousal support. Now, speaking of marital standard of living, let's talk about marital standard of living, because I think this is absolutely ludicrous, and it's so hard for me to comprehend just any basic economics in this whole entire thing. But here it is. Marital standard of living is theoretically the standard that you were able to maintain while you were married. But here's where the kicker is. You had the same amount of money during the marriage, whether that's 1 income, 2 income, 10 incomes. You've got one pot of income that's supporting one household that has a marital standard of living. And now that same exact pot of income has to support 2 households, and it's supposed to do so at the same marital standard of living. I'm not sure how one supports one at 100%, but now is supposed to support 2 at that same 100%. Doesn't make sense to me. But that is the theory behind spousal support, is that it is an attempt to maintain the marital standard of living for both parties. But that's kind of false. And it's false for all of the reasons that I just said. It's like virtually impossible to maintain the same marital standard of living for 2 households when you have the same amount that was setting it for 1. So to go in and expect that your spousal support, whether you are the paying party or the receiving party, that you are going to be able to maintain the same marital standard of living, probably not so. If you're paying, well, now you have a reduction in income. And if you're receiving, probably not, because you got to support another household. So that's going to be problematic. Marital standard of living is unlikely to be maintained, in my experience, in spousal support orders. So once again, let's become financially independent as quickly as possible. Along those same lines, bills matter, right? Your bills come into play when determining your spousal support. That's also not true. If you can believe it, the court doesn't really care so much about your bills when they are calculating spousal support. Why? Well, I could go buy a brand new Lamborghini and say, but my car payment is so high, and I'm going to go and move to Malibu on a beachfront property, and oh, my rent or my mortgage is so high, I simply can't afford spousal support. Or I simply require so much spousal support just to pay my car payment and my roof over my head. Well, it's not practical for the court to consider all of those bills when handling or determining spousal support, because they can fluctuate and you can live beyond your means. And if they considered somebody being financially stupid or making poor decisions in their awards, then people would be manipulating it all over the place. So yeah, you owe the money. Your credit cards are out of control. Your car is expensive, rent's expensive, food's expensive, gas is expensive, all of it is expensive, and you want to give back to your church, and a vacation is nice every now and then. Got it. That's totally great. And that's fine. And that's the same for absolutely everybody else, including the other spouse. So the court isn't going to consider your bills independently in most cases. Instead, there's a formula typically that they will consider that includes the general cost of these things. If you choose to live beyond your means and now you can't afford spousal support, same is true as child support, that's like a you problem. And the court's going to say, make better financial decisions. If you, let's go to wife in the original scenario, can't live off of $600 a month, which I get it, that's sort of unreasonable. She should probably go get a job. But you can't live off of it and you still went and signed a lease for a house that costs $4,000 a month, like you need to do better and rethink your financial decisions. Otherwise, give me a call and I'll refer you to a bankruptcy attorney or something, because that's probably where you're headed. So the bottom line is your bills, while they matter to you, aren't typically going to be considered by a court when calculating spousal support. All of this is being said for one purpose and one purpose only, and that's maybe to give you a chuckle or to have you understand some of the nuances in spousal support. So as you walk into court, or you head into mediation, or you're just having a pillow talk discussion with your ex as you have a 1 or 2 last night rendezvous, you understand where the law is, what's likely to happen, what's not likely to happen, and you can make your arguments better. You can pick your battles a little bit more wisely. Spousal support sucks. Nobody wants it. Person paying it doesn't want to pay it. Person receiving it wants more. The bottom line is your marital decisions matter and they carry through on divorce, even if it's spousal support. If you or somebody you know has a shocking tale about spousal support, maybe they got some outlandish award, I'd love to hear it.
That wraps up another episode of Gavels Down, Voices Up. If you found value in our discussion today, please subscribe, leave a review, and share with someone who needs these insights. Your engagement helps us grow and impact more lives. I'm Rachel King, thanking you for listening and reminding you to speak up, because every voice deserves to be heard.